December 1984, Kamru Township, Pennsylvania. The body of a strangled woman is dumped in a ravine. For 20 years, the case of Jane Doe lies dormant until a cop and a psychic join forces.
I started to see lines of light across a map, and I saw the Brooklyn Bridge.
Can a psychic's map locate a killer and solve a 20-year-old murder? Kamru, a small township in rural Pennsylvania. The solving of the Jane Doe case began in an unorthodox way, with an inquiry into the unrelated homicide of a local man. Murder is an unusual occurrence in this community. More unusual is the fact Detective Robert Warner, for the first time in his career, is going to meet with professional psychic Lauren Tibido. She has been working with the dead man's family. That's why Warner is here, hoping to find some answers.
I figured I'll use every tool I can to solve a crime. And at this point here, I figured I had nothing to lose, so let's go down and talk to Dr. Lauren and see.
Despite his optimism, Warner is not about to go advertising the visit just yet.
At that time, I didn't know how people would react, so I kept it to myself.
In fact, he didn't even tell Lauren his reason for the visit.
I didn't say anything about that case when I first walked in. She didn't even know I was a police officer. I walked in and sat down, and she knew I was there for a reading. And actually, Dr. Lauren asked me if I was in law enforcement and if I was a police officer, and I said yes.
As Warner hadn't identified himself, there's no way Lauren could have known he was a cop.
That's when she said, well, you're working on 2 cases, and one of them's very old, like put on a shelf for many years. And I was only working on 1 at the time, so I first said, no, I only have 1 case.
I said, no, there's 2 cold cases here, 2. And he said something like, well, I only have this one, but keep talking. So I did.
This lady's crazy. I'm here for 1 I can't solve. But yes, at first it was like, no way, but when you hear something like that, it's always on your mind now for the rest of the reading. You're picking your brain trying to figure out, what is she talking about? What is she talking about? And then I remembered this other case that we had that I wasn't even working on. And I told her I wasn't working on that, but she said that that's going to be being worked on. She actually saw that one being solved. So at that point there, I was excited.
The second case that Lauren referred to was an unsolved homicide dating back to 1984. That year, as residents of the small community of Kamru Township prepared for the holidays, a body was dumped on the outskirts of town. Discovered 2 days before Christmas, the victim had been strangled and meticulously bound with rope. She was wrapped in a green army-style blanket and wrapped again in a paint-splattered drop cloth. An autopsy revealed that the woman was about 30 years old and had a history of abusing drugs. Forensic investigation, which was still in its infancy, revealed no clues to the killer's identity. With no means of identification, the victim was referred to as Jane Doe, a standard police procedure in the U.S. She was buried in a local cemetery. At the time Jane Doe was murdered, Lauren was a young woman at college living in a different state. Warner was blown away by the fact that Lauren had any inclination about the case.
She's talking about the 2 cases that we have, which floored me. For her to even say that, how does she know that we have 2 cases? And one's been sitting on a shelf for 15 or 20 years. And that's when I contacted her the following day.
It was in that phone conversation that I started seeing green little lights traveling across Route 78. It was as if I was looking at a map of New Jersey, New York, and eastern Pennsylvania. And as it moved across, I looked upward, sort of upward toward the Brooklyn Bridge. And I could feel, and even smell the energy of the city, and that we were dealing with, New York.
Lauren was not only able to give a sense of place, she was also able to give some clue as to the killer's occupation.
And I remember asking Detective Rob if one of the people that they thought it might have been could have been a truck driver, because I was shown that this was somebody who would have, I kept seeing the side of a cab of a truck.
So at this point here, I thanked her and left to go with that. I still did not have the case. A few months later, my sergeant had pulled the case out and put it over on my desk and told me, since you're going to be here a while, you might as well start working on this and see what you can do with it.
2 months after Lauren predicted it, Warner was assigned the Jane Doe case. The other case, the murder he went to see Lauren about in the first place, remained unsolved. But for now, Warner focused on the unidentified woman's case. Lauren had also envisioned a truck driver, and sure enough, one of the prime suspects in the original investigation was indeed a truck driver.
Back in '84, there was a truck driver that was going around picking up young ladies with reddish-brown hair, strangling them, and dumping them out of his truck. After they were able to capture the truck driver, he admitted to all the ones that he did. He said he was not in Pennsylvania. There was no way of proving he was in Pennsylvania, so we knew it wasn't him. The actual ligatures were tied differently. At that time, there was no connection.
Did Lauren get it wrong? Was her vision of the truck driver the man who had already been cleared in the case? Or was she right? Was the woman's murderer simply a different truck driver? And the big question, where was the killer right now? Cold cases are notoriously problematic. Memories fade, evidence becomes contaminated, witnesses die.
You got to understand, when the first time that this information came up, I didn't even know Jane Doe's name.
Without the victim's name, there was virtually no chance of ever nailing the killer. But there was one positive to working a 20-year-old crime. Forensics technology had come a long way in the last decade. When Detective Robert Warner started investigating a local murder in Kamru Township, Pennsylvania, he never expected to be hurled back 20 years to an unsolved homicide. Professional psychic Lauren Tibido predicted that Warner would be working on an old, unsolved case. Now he was. The case of Jane Doe, a woman who had been strangled, tied up in a blanket, and dumped over an embankment.
Basically what it was it got it fired up in me. And I think my sergeant, when I came back and told him after the reading I had the first time with Lauren about the two cases and so forth, I think it kind of all just went together.
Lauren's vision of the Brooklyn Bridge clearly indicated a New York connection to the case. There was also the map highlighting Route 78, and she sensed that the murderer was a truck driver. As to how psychics see visions, they're all different.
Many people see it visually, others perceive it in a telepathic, auditory way. Others get a real gut sense, they literally have a gut clench. Many people have what I call sort of a field feeling, like from the skin out. They have, the tingles or something. So there are at least 4 different ways people perceive it.
Warner's first challenge was to put a name to the victim. The 1984 autopsy had revealed that the woman was a drug addict, 20 years on. Could this help the police find her real identity? Warner reckoned there was a reasonable chance that she had a criminal record. If that was the case, her fingerprints would be on file. AFIS is the national database of all criminal fingerprints. It didn't exist when the woman was murdered in 1984. Warner submitted her fingerprints, and sure enough, she had been arrested on a minor drug offense.
Match gave me Margaret Calciano and Margaret Gravasi. Gravasi was Margie's married name. She was married for about a year in the 70s. So with those two names at that point, I have a computer system where I can go in and I can type in the names in the certain states. And I typed in Brooklyn, New York, and typed in her married name, and I didn't come up with anything. I come up with a few Gravasis. I tried calling, and no one knew Margie at that point. So then I took her maiden name, which was Calciano, entered that in to my system, and came up with probably 250 names in Brooklyn. And the first name I called was her mother.
He says, do you have a daughter named Margaret? I says, yes. I said, who's calling? And he says, I'm a detective from Pennsylvania. And he said, I hate to tell you this, Miss Calciano, but we found your daughter in 1984. And I says, okay. I says, what do you mean found her? He says, well, she was murdered.
For 20 long years, Joan Calciano lived the fear and dread only a mother can comprehend. The sheer horror of never knowing if her daughter was alive or dead. Now, finally, the wait was over.
It was a relief because at least I knew, you know, I knew in my heart she wasn't alive, but I didn't know where she was. You know, and a lot of things go through a mother's mind, you know, and I just thank God she was cut up and never been found, or buried and never been found, and, you know, just so many things went through my mind. But I miss her, you know. She was such a beautiful girl. She could have had anything in life. Yeah, but that was it.
Here's a woman who lost her daughter 20 years ago, and she said the last time she saw her was December 19th, 1984, and she got into an argument with her, slapped her on the face, and she ran out the door, and that was the last she saw her. And it haunted her ever since that was the way her and her daughter split.
The next day, Warner and his partner drove to Mrs. Calciano's apartment in Brooklyn.
She welcomed us in, and there were friends and family members there, and we sat around the kitchen table, and we showed her photos just to make sure that she could ID and say that, yes, that's my daughter. We showed her photos from the autopsy.
You know, and we had to ID it, and it was her. And it was hard, you know, to identify her.
And then we got down to brass tacks, and we asked them who was involved in this.
He asked me if I had any idea who killed her, and I said yes. And I gave him the guy's name.
With this information, could Warner find the killer? For almost 20 years, the file on an unidentified female murder victim lay dormant. The Kamru Township Police Department had reached a dead end until Detective Robert Warner met with professional psychic Lauren Tibido. Spurred on by Lauren's visions, and with some good old-fashioned police work, Warner was able to identify the woman as Margie Calciano. Margie's family were able to identify who they thought was her killer.
All of them said without a doubt, Peter, and they gave us the last name of Iosa. Peter was last seen with her. He was, from what the family at that time had told us, he was fatally attracted to her. He would get upset if she was with someone else. He was quite older than her. He was 20 years her senior.
He was obsessed with my daughter, and I knew that he had killed her because he disappeared the same day she did, and that was December 19th.
He supposedly was a very hothead. He would snap, and he slapped her around before.
She was doing coke, and he was giving her money to buy it. And when she needed money, you know, he gave it to her. And he swore nobody would ever have her, you know, and he made sure of that. Yeah.
So we kind of had a good feeling that he was a good suspect. When we left, we just didn't know how to find him. We returned back to our station the following day, and I started working on it, and I couldn't find the last name of Peter Iosa anywhere in New York. I couldn't find it anywhere in the United States.
According to the Census Bureau, there are 555,864 Peters living in the United States. All Warner has to do is find the right one. And all he has to go on are Lauren's visions. A truck, the map with the beam of light, and the Brooklyn Bridge. Warner calls Lauren.
I remember talking to him by telephone not long after about this situation and getting that very visual movie feeling. As he was describing things that he knew about this case, I began to see imagery of a truck driver. Not a big guy, this one. I didn't get a sense of big hulking. On the slender side, definitely a smoker. And I remember seeing the white door of a truck opening, and as if I was looking over the shoulder of the driver stepping out. A thickly quilted sort of plaid, like a thick flannel shirt that you might wear instead of a coat in wintertime. Definitely felt like winter to me. It was very clear that we were at a crisp, cool, almost like could smell lake water near it. And we were at a truck stop somewhere near water. And I guess in this case it would have been the Great Lakes. That region would be on the way. It's almost like a psychic profile of him. I do feel he's a repeat killer. Certainly a lot of sexual violence, rape, assault, that sort of thing.
The revelation that this might be the work of a serial killer, as opposed to a one-off crime of passion, upped the ante for Warner. He was now in a race against time.
We have to get him. We need to get him off the street. If he's killed once and he's going to do it again, and how many has he done in between? It's like any law enforcement officer, anyone actually, that you want to get this guy off the road, off the streets. He's a danger. There's not a female around that's safe as long as he's out there.
In an attempt to get Pete's last name, Warner phoned Joe Drezick, an ex-boyfriend of Margie.
And he said that he didn't know the name, but he knew that Pete had filed a complaint against him one time, and that the police may have it on record if they'll find it from way back then. So at that time, I contacted New York PD, gave them the information that I had, and they were able to come up with a report and fax it to me in a couple of days, and it came back with Peter Williams.
Warner used Williams' social security number to track the fugitive. He discovered Williams was drawing welfare checks in Milwaukee, and he had been a truck driver, just as Lauren had predicted. One of his main routes had been Brooklyn to Wisconsin, which would have taken him past the Great Lakes. Once again, Lauren's visions proved to be uncannily accurate. With Lauren's help, Warner has gotten this far. He has a name, Peter Williams, and a face. But has he got the hard evidence needed to convict the man he believes murdered Margie Calciano? At any given time, there's well over 20,000 women missing in the U.S. Margie Calciano was just another statistic. And for 20 years, she didn't even have a name. Were it not for the collaboration of Detective Robert Warner and professional psychic Lauren Tibido, the chances are Margie would have faded into history as an unidentified victim. The combination of psychic intervention and solid conventional police work produced a prime suspect, Peter Williams.
When I first met Pete and I walked up to him, I advised him who I was and the reason why I wanted to talk to him, and the blood drained from his face. You could see him just literally turn white. He was just pale and became quite nervous. He said the last time he saw Margaret took her to a methadone clinic, and she got out of the car and that was the last he saw her. And he said he washed his hands of her. And those words, when he said I washed my hands of her, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. he said he didn't deny being intimate with her, but what he did deny was killing her.
Warner needed more than suspicion to nail Williams. He needed hard evidence, and he had it. When he took on the case, all the evidence was resubmitted back to the lab. Improved forensics technology revealed a single hair embedded in the army blanket used to wrap Margie. To prove it belonged to Williams, he needed to get a DNA sample.
He felt like he had that licked because he wasn't denying having sex with her. What he was denying was killing her. So he was willing to give us the DNA samples. He didn't know we had the hair at that point. And after the fact, prior to leaving, I basically had told him flat out that we felt he's the one that did this. We knew that he probably wouldn't stay in Milwaukee long, and he didn't. He left a few weeks after we were there.
The DNA analysis proved positive. The single hair embedded in the blanket that encased Margie Calciano matched the DNA sample taken from Williams.
When we arrested him in Tucson, he looked at it. He didn't say a whole lot. He didn't say he wasn't guilty at that point. What he said was he read the probable cause and saw the hair. And I think that's what floored him. I think he realized that he had it at that point.
The DNA profile of the hair recovered from the green blanket matched the DNA profile of Peter Williams. Based on your affiant's investigation, information that your affiant has received in the DNA profile results which were received from mitotyping technologies matching the recovered hair from the green blanket wrapped around the victim and the DNA profile of Peter Williams, I am requesting an arrest warrant be issued for the suspect, Peter Williams.
You do what you gotta do. Right? Couple of mistakes.
Well,
I'm saying a couple of mistakes.
Peter Williams was charged with first-degree murder and taken back to Pennsylvania. A month before he was due to face trial, Williams died of cancer. Once again, he had cheated the scales of justice.
I wish we could have gone to trial because I would have rather him been found guilty by a jury. It would have been better for the family and friends that way. It would have been a definite closure.
I felt I was cheated when he killed her and not knowing where she was all those years. And then I wanted to see his face in the courtroom. I wanted him to see me, and which I felt I got cheated again, you know, and it was hard. I mean, I felt very bad. I broke down and cried because I didn't want it to go that way. I wanted him to see me, but it didn't work. So naturally, I felt I was cheated again, you know.
When Margie Calciano had been positively identified, at the request of her mother, her body was exhumed. Today, she is buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, just blocks from her mom's home.
And it was funny because when we were up in Brooklyn, we're sitting, and I'm looking at the Brooklyn Bridge, and that's when it dawned on me, and I started thinking about all the things that Dr. Lauren told me that fit. Even though prior to that, it didn't sink in and I wasn't using it. But after I sat there and thought about it, I thought, okay, the Brooklyn Bridge, I just went down the line and all the pieces started fitting in.
I think where people get stuck is that it's psychic and it must be somehow bigger or more magical than something else, and it's not. It's just a different way of getting information.
You'll get bits and pieces of information. It's all fragmented. And what you have to do is, it's like a puzzle. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and you have to sit down and try and place these things into your case. Once you sit down and you can pop in all the pieces, you'll solve your crime.
I would say the best attitude for success is one of very practical, if this can help me solve a case, I'll use it, right? It should be seen as a tool, not as a solution to a case. Psychics do not solve the crimes. The police do that. Where we have help, I think, is sorting out the wheat from the chaff.
Would we have solved the case if I didn't go to Dr. Lauren? It's kind of strange how things work. It's like it's meant to be, you know? It's like things happen for a reason.
Every suspect is innocent until proven guilty. Because Williams died before going to trial, nobody can say for certain if Peter Williams killed Margie Calciano. And there's another twist to the story. Again, because there was no trial, authorities are not allowed to submit Williams' DNA to the national database. So other police officers trying to solve other cold cases will never be able to cross-check Williams as a suspect. So we may never know for certain if and how many times he killed. January 2003, a psychic has a vision of a violent murder in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
I felt terrified.
She sees the killer's face.
He had black hair, he had brown eyes, he had a very round, full face.
But her description is ignored by the police. A serial killer is on the loose. More women could die if no one listens. In May 2002, Murray Pace, a 22-year-old graduate assistant at Louisiana State University, leaves work early to attend a friend's wedding. 2 hours later, her roommate returns to the apartment to find her brutally murdered. In the following weeks, 3 more women are attacked. The Baton Rouge police then announce that DNA evidence links Murray Pace's murder to that of 2 other women. They are now dealing with a vicious serial killer, who might also be behind the savage rape and murder of a number of other women in the area since 1990. The town is gripped by fear.
It was panic. You had ladies asking for self-defense courses. You had a major sale in pepper spray. People were worried about their daughters.
To catch the killer, the Baton Rouge Police Department sets up a task force together with the FBI and other local forces. Detective McDavid with the Zachary Police suggests as prime suspect a local peeping Tom who's been causing trouble for years.
Evidently, we put so much pressure on him that it began moving into the Baton Rouge area.
Unfortunately, he doesn't match the serial killer profile used by the FBI.
The majority of the profiles that we were getting from the FBI at the time were generic, pretty much a white male in his mid-30s that lives at home, lives with his mother, or a loner.
The Zachary suspect is ignored. The FBI have witnesses to back up their profile. One reports a white male driving a pickup truck with a naked female slumped on the passenger seat. She looked dead. It was near the Whiskey Bay exit on Interstate 10, close to where the body of another victim had been found. Another witness sees a suspicious-looking white man near where a woman had been killed while visiting her mother's grave. She'd been beaten to death. By December 2002, the serial killer has taken 2 more women. A white man is seen near one of the bodies. The task force starts taking DNA samples of thousands of white males.
They were taking DNA samples from people that they thought may have had some connection in the neighborhood where the homicides occurred, or people that drove a white truck, or males that were in a certain age bracket.
At the end of December, the task force released their first composite sketch of the killer. He's a 25 to 35-year-old white male, apparently physically strong and awkward with women. But 6 months later, they still have no suspect. And Ann Williams, a forensics consultant and former lawyer, teaches a college course in forensic investigation. She's worked on a number of cold cases and wants to help out on this one.
I knew there was talk of a serial killer. And I decided to call Jeannie Borgen, who has worked some cases with me as a police psychic. And I had contacted Murray's mother, Ann Pace, and gotten Murray's birth information, which is what Jeannie needs to work on these cases as a psychic.
Murray's mother decides to join Ann's forensics class.
She wanted to be there for Murray. She said that she was there when Murray was born, and she couldn't be there when it mattered most, when Murray died.
Ann Williams called me, and she told me she had a woman in her class by the name of Ann Pace, and that she had lost a daughter and that she had been murdered. I had Murray's birth certificate name and birth date, and I used that as a method of psychometry. In other words, I'm touching and I'm examining the name, and then I get the vision. I sort of ask for the vision mentally.
Ann often has forensics experts call in and talk to students on the speakerphone about cases they've worked on. So she sets up a conference call with Jean in California.
Well, we're all here to talk to you, my class.
The first thing that I saw was a house. Very neat house, a neat manicured lawn, very peaceful. I had seen him on a street corner looking at the apartment building. She didn't know him, but she had seen him. So he was familiar to her. She was not overwhelmed or frightened. He can be very personable. But suddenly he got very violent, and he attacked. This girl fought back. For every blow she got, she gave him one. But he had a knife. And it was a brutal fight. And I was stuck in the picture. I couldn't get out. I knew that the final moments that she had to die with something of the throat. And he did. He did cut her throat. I felt terrified. It was like Murray and I were one at that point. I had to sit there and watch her die. It was really hard. As it ended, he straightened up and he looked at me. And it was like I was looking eye to eye with him. I started shaking inside, and then I had little butterflies, and then he disappeared. When I looked at him, I thought he was probably about 5'10" to 6 feet. He was Afro-American. He had black hair, he had brown eyes, he had a very round, full face, and then he had this little goatee. He had a mustache, but then there was other times that I picked him up, he did not have a mustache.
Someone in the class asked her, well, what's he wearing, this Baton Rouge serial killer? She said, well, right now, she says, I'm seeing him in blue Dickies. And I said, well, what are Dickies? I mean, I didn't even know. And the class laughed, and they said, those are work pants, you know.
With Murray's mother verifying the known details of the murder, the class are stunned by the realism of the psychic's vision. But Ann Williams is uneasy.
When Jean first described the serial killer as being a light-complected black man, I just thought she was off. I didn't believe it. Because, you know, statistically, he would be a white man, and that's what they said they were looking for.
Can Ann's investigation be of any help to the task force if Jeannie's vision is so off on such a key point? January 2003. Baton Rouge is being terrorized by a serial killer. A task force is set up to catch him. They believe he's a white man and take DNA samples of over 2,000 men. But 6 months later, they still have no suspect. Forensics consultant Ann Williams wants to help. She involves her friend, psychic Jane Borgen, who has a stark vision of the murder of one of the killer's victims. But in her vision, the killer is a light-skinned African-American. Ann thinks she's wrong.
Ann was right. You don't positively make a statement about a suspect until you're absolutely certain.
But Ann has worked with Jane before, and the psychic's accurate description of the murder persuades her not to give up too easily. Over the following months, Jane has constant visions of the killer.
I was tuning in on him every night. He was in the car a lot.
She sees him at Whiskey Bay off Interstate 10, where the bodies of 2 earlier victims were found. Jane is convinced there are more. With her friend, Chip Bowman, Ann Williams tries to find the places Jane sees in her visions. If they find another body, it might lead them to the killer. They photograph likely locations and send her the pictures.
Well, I think probably if we take pictures anywhere around here, it'll be helpful to Jane, because who knows where he would have dumped somebody. Then we could go back the opposite end, where Pam Kennemore's body was found, to that north area, that wooded area that Jeannie's interested in, and take some shots of that.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Well, it's very, very hard because I have to have a fix. I have to see a certain tree, or I have to see something that looks like what I'm seeing.
Jeannie tries to guide them through the landscapes of her visions.
I can't believe this, Jeannie. We're actually seeing what you're telling us.
Listen, you need to go to your right. There's going to be a big line of trees there. Yeah, all right, now wait a minute. When he walked into the line of trees, there was like a culvert there and he tripped.
There is a dip in the ground, just like you said. I cannot believe this.
But finding a body in this vast wilderness requires a massive search, and time is running out. Jeannie begins to sense the killer's moods.
He really did not like women, especially women who were mentally above him, or he felt superior to him.
These women were basically the same. They were professional women. I mean, we had 2 homicides in Zachary, which is in the parish, that were fairly consistent with what was happening in Baton Rouge.
It was almost a hate sexual type of a situation.
Jeannie senses the killer is ready to strike again.
The energy had been building in him as he watched the person for maybe weeks.
He did a lot of surveillance, what we can tell, on these victims' houses. He knew their movements, knew when they come outside, he knew who was at the house.
And then when it got powerful in the body, he went for it. I knew that this was a man who had to kill.
As the killer's bloodlust becomes stronger, Jeannie has a terrible vision.
I thought I had another victim. And then suddenly I realized she's alive. And it was like, oh my God, she's alive. And she's gonna be one of the future victims. And then at that point, I thought, but where is she? Where do I go from here?
The killer is already stalking his next victim. As Jeannie tries desperately to see where the attack might happen, the landscape of her visions becomes more recognizable.
He stood one night looking out at the water, and I saw these beautiful white birds fly over the water. That was I think that was at the foot of Stanford Avenue.
2 of the killer's victims had lived on Stanford Avenue. Does his new victim also live here? With time running out, Ann and Chip scour the area.
The next thing I got was a house. It was a greenhouse. It had 2 trees on both sides, like this, like a frame, and it had bushes in front. That had to be where she lived. But I couldn't quite figure out, I couldn't get anything that would give me a sign as to where it was at.
And then finally a breakthrough. Ann and Chip locate one of Jeannie's visions.
He went to this place that was sort of a little restaurant with a big television. when I got the picture of this little restaurant. It wasn't much, but I was overjoyed that they had found it, because I thought that he'd probably frequent that a lot.
But tragically, they are too late. On March 13, 2003, the body of 26-year-old Carrie Yoder is found at Whiskey Bay. Once again, the killer had been careful not to leave any fingerprints.
But he did leave one important evidence on the body. That was his DNA, which is similar to a fingerprint.
DNA evidence shows she's a victim of the same man who killed Murray Pace. The man the task force are convinced is white, but who appears in Jeannie's visions as a light-skinned African-American.
But as far as the description of this light-complected black man, I just didn't buy that. He's white. She's wrong.
Then, some days later, while talking to Murray's old roommate, Anne makes an extraordinary discovery.
She told me about some neighbors of Murray's who had seen a suspicious man standing across the street staring at Murray's townhouse the morning she was murdered. They each went to the police that day and gave their description. None of them knew the other had seen him, but the police weren't interested. They had a profile they were working from that this is a white man. So they just totally ignored credible witnesses that day.
So the neighbors posted their testimonies on a well-known website.
Said that this guy was a light-complected black man wearing blue Dickies with a wannabe goatee. And I said, you gotta be kidding. I was trying to figure out, well, the police won't come do a sketch, so what can I do? So I wound up ordering some software that the police use.
Together with Karen Savoy, one of Murray's neighbors, Anne puts together a composite sketch of the man they saw watching Murray's house the day she was murdered.
I don't see anything there. Could we, go down? Let's try 812.
Wanna try it?
No, I don't think so. And
No.
rounded on this.
So it needs
on the
flatter?
tip. Yes.
Okay.
But
we'll keep going.
not as broad as the one that I liked. I think
about-
it was 836.
What about that one?
Jeannie confirms this is the man she saw in her visions. Anne sends it to the task force.
Anne and I were talking constantly about what we could do to get the police to recognize that this was a black man, not a white man. But they just didn't seem to look at it as far as we knew.
Once we got these sketches and everything, I drafted a letter, and I put their verbal description of this guy, because that's the most important thing, and how to reach these witnesses, and that they really would like to speak with law enforcement and hopefully do a professional sketch. And I sent that, I overnighted it to Governor Foster, and then to the task force, and I didn't get any response from them.
But when she tried to produce the sketch to the task force, they turned it down. They didn't want to hear about it. It was a white male they were looking for.
Although the police agree that the witnesses all saw the same man, Anne is not allowed to release the sketch.
He said, well, you know, we already have a sketch. We don't want another sketch out there. You're not a professional sketch artist. I said, well, I know. I said, but who did your other sketch? You know, from Lafayette. He said, well, that was a professional sketch artist. I said, well, that sketch doesn't look like anybody on this planet.
A month later, in April 2003, police in nearby Zachary received fresh complaints about a peeping Tom in a neighborhood where 2 women were previously raped and murdered.
The neighbor across the street here called in and stated that a black male was standing at this window right here, peeping in this window. The lady that lived here was a school teacher. She was a single mom who had 1 child here. We saw several footprints here at the windowsill. We followed these prints, and they went around the corner right here and went down the fence line right here and took off in the neighborhood.
Zachary police think it's the same peeping Tom who some years earlier they suspected of a vicious attack on 2 teenagers with a machete at the local cemetery.
2 teenagers were parking in the graveyard here It was a very stormy night, a lot of lightning going on. One of our officers came down the road right here and saw the dome light on in the car, knowing that nobody's supposed to be in the graveyard at that time of night. He come in here and stopped and got his flashlight out and checked and saw two teenagers in there covered in blood. And they began screaming. He called for help, stated a black male had came to them and began cutting them up with a big hack blade. He saw the police officer drive up. He reached back in the car and took a set of keys and fled the scene.
Working with the victims, police did a sketch of the attacker. It looks just like the Peeping Tom. His name is Derek Todd Lee. They suggested him to the task force, but they aren't interested in a black Peeping Tom. They believe the serial killer is white. If they won't listen to colleagues, reliable witnesses, or even an experienced psychic, how many more women will die before the killer is caught? A savage serial killer is preying on the town of Baton Rouge. The police are hunting a white man, but psychic Jeannie Borgen believes he's African American. And while Ann Williams and photographer Chip Bowman try to find the places she sees him in, the killer strikes again. Meanwhile, police in nearby Zachary think the killer could be a black Peeping Tom who's been plaguing their town for years. With fresh complaints of the Peeping Tom in their area, Zachary police now reopen the file of their main suspect, Derek Todd Lee. Apart from his Peeping Tom offenses, Lee has also been in jail for various burglaries and for beating his girlfriend.
We worked out a timeline, and we saw where he had a job, when he didn't have a job.
The timeline showed them something startling.
When he was in prison, we didn't have no murders. When he was out, we began having problems in the area.
Meanwhile, in Baton Rouge, the task force get lucky. There were witnesses to the abduction of Carrie Yoder. Police now release a second sketch of the serial killer and announced that he could in fact be of any race, not necessarily white. This is sweet music to McDavid's ears.
In the back of your mind, you want to go out and say, I told you so.
Was a likeness of a black male that was also similar to a sketch that was produced by Ann Williams.
Now psychic Jeannie Borgen has a terrifying premonition. The killer is about to strike again.
At this point, I knew he would kill if he had the chance.
But the clues are too vague. Ann Williams feels helpless to prevent it.
She says, well, I'm getting a woman missing in Alabama, and she said she's a pretty brunette. And I said, well, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about a woman in Alabama.
Then, Melinda McGee disappears from her home in Mobile, Alabama. Her body is never found. Finally, in May 2003, McDavid gets a court order to take a DNA swab from Derek Todd Lee.
My partner, Trevor Hannah, and me drove up there, and we found him out in the yard. He saw me get out the vehicle and began getting upset and told them to tell me to leave. He knew, that I was after him. In 1998, I interviewed Lee in the Mayberry murder. And after interviewing him, I looked him in his face, because he was real cocky. And I told him, so I know what you did, I'm gonna get you one day.
The sample is sent to the crime lab to be analyzed. Lee now takes his 2 children out of school and leaves town. Some days later, the analyst at the DNA lab makes the discovery that seals Lee's fate. His DNA matches that of the serial killer. McDavid is called in to see the task force.
I walked in, their eyes were on me. And I kind of glanced back and looked around, and I'm not for sure who said it. They come up to me and said, y'all just solved the serial killer. Y'all's DNA swab matched the serial killer. Oh, I was elated. I was excited. Tears came to my eyes.
The task force now officially identify the serial killer. It's Derek Todd Lee. Police track Lee to a cheap motel in Atlanta. The officers just miss him as they arrive. Following a tip-off, they finally arrest him outside a tire store.
The minute I heard his name, it was like, that's him. They got him. It was just pure elation.
On the 12th of October 2004, a jury takes just 80 minutes to find Derek Todd Lee guilty of the first-degree murder of Charlotte Murray Pace. He's also indicted for the murders of 6 other women.
This is the kind of case, these serial killings, where a psychic can be very helpful because you don't have a DNA database. And oftentimes, people are surprised to learn many police agencies are not well trained or well equipped to deal with these kinds of stranger killings.
This case was very difficult because it was like working on 15 cases rather than just one case. I got frustrated, so frustrated that I couldn't get on top of him fast enough to catch him.
It was a relief off my shoulders because since 1992 we've been battling these murders, and I made a commitment to myself before I retired I was going to solve these murders.
I would hope that the sketch we did maybe helped convince them that Derek Todd Lee was the man they were after. I hope so.
Lee is given the death penalty and is awaiting execution at Angola prison.
It was a victory for law enforcement. It was a victory for our city. In the town of Zachary, you know, people still leave their doors unlocked, you know, and not looking over their shoulders. And now they can still do that. They can go out and walk freely and not worry about that.